Chyna was 18 years old, standing on the edge of adulthood with her whole life ahead of her. Born and raised in Albany, New York, she was the daughter of Chyna Forney and the late Michael Anderson Sr. Those who knew her best didn't just describe her as smart or talented, they described her as light. A radiant, joyful presence who left an impact wherever she went. She had just weeks left before graduation. Her cap and gown were already picked out. College acceptance letters sat proudly on her bedroom dresser. Chyna Forney was 18 years old with a bright smile, a bright future, and a heart that made everyone around her feel seen and loved. But all of that vanished in a split second. The person who pulled the trigger? Not a stranger, not a masked criminal in the shadows, but someone her family once welcomed in, someone they trusted. Even worse, he showed no remorse. As Chyna's family poured their pain out in court, the man who killed her sat there and laughed. Welcome to Crime Scene Exposed, the channel where we go far beyond the headlines. Here, we dive deep into the most infamous crimes, baffling disappearances, disturbing confessions, and twisted criminal minds from around the world. From high-profile murder trials to cold cases that still haunt investigators, we uncover the truth behind the crimes that shook the world. If you're drawn to real-life stories that explore the darkest corners of human behavior, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a new episode. Today we're examining a case out of Albany, New York. While known for its historic architecture and political legacy as the Empire State's capital, Albany has recently battled a darker reality, one marked by escalating gang tensions and an alarming spike in youth gun violence. Turf wars, retaliation shootings, and reckless disregard for life have claimed too many innocent victims. Chyna Forney was one of them. A star student and gifted athlete, she had no ties to gangs or street life. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in a hail of bullets meant for someone else. But her story doesn't end with the shot that took her life. It continues in the courtroom, where the lack of remorse from her killer sparked even more outrage than the crime itself.
20-year-old Albany man convicted of killing Chyna Forney in 2021 handed 25 years to life in prison today in Albany County Court. But the defendant wasn't in the courtroom to hear that sentence. CBS 6's Tom Eshin was in the courtroom today. He joins us live from our Albany bureau. Tom, what happened today?
To truly understand the weight of this tragedy, you need to know who Chyna Unique Forney was, because she wasn't just another name in the headlines. She was someone, and she mattered. She was a senior at the Albany Leadership Charter School for Girls, a school that champions empowerment, education, and leadership for young women. And Chyna embodied all three. She wasn't just a student, she was a standout. A leader. Someone who made other people want to do better, try harder, smile more. Inside the classroom, she excelled. She had dreams of becoming a nurse, fueled by a deep desire to help others. It wasn't just about a paycheck or prestige. Chyna genuinely cared. She wanted to heal, to nurture, to make a difference. That's who she was. Her academic performance showed she had the drive to achieve those dreams, and her compassionate nature made it clear why nursing was the path she chose. But wasn't just books and grades. Chyna's spark extended far beyond academics. She was a force on the track field, both indoor and outdoor. Coaches saw her dedication, her hustle, her ability to push through pain and fatigue with fierce determination. Her commitment earned her the respect of teammates and teachers alike. Every sprint she ran told the story of a young woman who refused to give less than her best. And when she wasn't racing across the finish line, she was dancing. Chyna was the heart of her school's dance team, a space where her personality really came alive. Her co-captain, Queen Malia Rowland, described her as the soul of the team. Someone who could walk into a room and instantly change the energy. You could be feeling the worst pain ever, Rowland shared, and Chyna would comfort you and just make you laugh. It wasn't forced. It wasn't a performance. That was just who Chyna was, someone who instinctively lifted the people around her. Her principal remembered her as a bright, shining light, the kind of student educators remember long after graduation. Chyna's energy was magnetic. She left people better than she found them. Her presence filled a room, her laughter was contagious, and her empathy ran deep. She wasn't just planning to graduate, she was counting the days. Her cap and gown had already been chosen. College plans were being made. She talked about what kind of nurse she wanted to be. She was making vision boards, dreaming aloud, inspiring others to reach for their futures just like she was reaching for hers. In photos, Chyna's personality shines through. Those confident poses, bright eyes, and joyful expression tell you everything. She was someone who celebrated life, who lived in color, who loved hard. And that love wasn't reserved for friends. Chyna was deeply bonded to her family. Her mother, Shannon, often said her daughter was her best friend. And for Chyna, family wasn't just about blood, it was about loyalty, about showing up, about loving without conditions. After her death, her family and friends gathered at the site where she was killed to honor her memory. Candles, balloons, flowers, photos, they turned that cold stretch of pavement into a sacred space of remembrance. People who knew her well shared stories, held each other, and tried to process the unthinkable. How could someone so full of life be gone? That gathering wasn't just a memorial, it was a reflection of how many lives Chyna had touched. Her school mourned, her teammates mourned, her community mourned. Because when someone like Chyna dies, the ripple effect is massive. It doesn't just break hearts. It leaves holes, permanent ones, in families, classrooms, locker rooms, and friend circles. And yet, despite the immense grief, those closest to Chyna have fought to ensure her memory isn't defined by how she died, but by how she lived, by the joy she gave, the dreams she had, the way she could turn someone's worst day around with just a look or a laugh. That's why her story matters. That's why it's being told here. Because Chyna Forney wasn't a statistic. She wasn't a bystander. She wasn't someone who put herself in danger. She was a daughter, a friend, a student, a dreamer, a protector of hearts. And now she's gone. But as we move forward in this episode, one thing remains clear. Chyna's story isn't just about loss. It's about who she was before her life was taken. And it's about holding her memory high, so the world remembers not just the tragedy, but the light we lost. May 3rd, 2021 began like any other spring afternoon in Albany, New York. The air was warm, the skies were clear, and the streets of Essex Street buzzed with life. School had just let out. Teenagers were chatting on the sidewalks, music played faintly in the distance, and the sense of summer around the corner filled the neighborhood with a quiet sense of hope. But by 2:30 p.m., that sense of hope shattered in the blink of an eye. Gunfire erupted, sudden, chaotic, and relentless. More than 30 bullets tore through the air, echoing off the brick walls and bouncing down narrow alleyways. Residents described the scene as a war zone. Within seconds, panic took over. People screamed. Children ran for cover. Mothers ducked behind cars, grabbing anyone they could pull to safety. It wasn't a random burst of violence, it was targeted, calculated. A gang-related ambush that turned a residential street into a battlefield. And Chyna Forney, just 18 years old, was caught in the middle of it. She wasn't the intended target. She wasn't involved in any feud. She was simply in the wrong place at the worst possible time, walking on the sidewalk near Essex Street when the gunfire began. She was hit once, a single bullet to her back. But that was enough. When first responders arrived on the scene, the chaos hadn't yet settled. Shell casings littered the street. Over 40 rounds had been fired, striking cars, fences, and pavement. Bystanders were frozen in shock, some crying, some calling loved ones, some still trying to comprehend what had just happened. And there, lying in the middle of the road, was Chyna. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her. Sirens wailed as they rushed her to Albany Medical Center. But the wound was too severe. Despite their efforts, Chyna was pronounced dead not long after arriving at the hospital. Just like that, her dreams, her plans, her future, gone. The news spread quickly, first through phone calls and social media, and then through a storm of grief that swept across Albany. Friends couldn't believe it. Teachers cried. Strangers left flowers on the pavement where her body had once laid. The very streets she had walked as a student, an athlete, a leader, now marked by blood and bullet holes. The public's grief was immediate, and so was the outrage. How could this happen to someone like her? How could a child, days away from graduating, be gunned down in broad daylight? Police began their investigation that same day. Witnesses described 2 men fleeing the scene. Surveillance footage and tips from community members quickly helped narrow the focus. It wasn't long before detectives identified the shooters, 20-year-olds Alvin Foy III and Jamar Manning, both known members of the notorious 50 Gang, a group tied to multiple violent incidents in Albany. Authorities revealed that Foy and Manning had fired over 30 rounds into a crowd near Essex Street during a dispute with rival gang members. It wasn't a warning shot. It wasn't an accident. It was an intentional, reckless act that put dozens of lives at risk. And Chyna paid the price. In that moment, the senselessness of gang violence hit Albany in the most personal way imaginable. Chyna wasn't part of the conflict. She wasn't in a gang. She wasn't armed. She was simply living her life until someone else's decision to settle a score with bullets ended hers. That night, a memorial began to form. Essex Street, once a place of routine and familiarity, became a vigil site. Candles were lit. Balloons were tied to lampposts. Her photo was printed and placed in frames. People stood silently, hugging one another, praying, shaking their heads in disbelief. The grief was raw and unfiltered. For the people of Albany, this was not just another tragic headline, it was personal. Chyna was one of their own, a symbol of what was possible, a reflection of the best their community had to offer. Her death wasn't just heartbreaking, it was infuriating, and the city demanded answers. The crime scene itself told part of the story: 31 shell casings scattered across the street, bullet holes in cars and homes, a shattered rear windshield, a child's bike left abandoned near the sidewalk, its bright colors now contrasting with the dark stain of blood nearby. Every detail added to the horror of what had happened. But what struck people most wasn't just the violence, it was the indifference behind it. The way two young men could unleash that kind of destruction without a single thought for the lives it might destroy. The randomness of the act, the carelessness, the complete disregard for human life. And amid that storm of violence, Chyna's death stood out not because it was the only tragedy, but because it represented something larger. A system failing its youth, a community losing its children, a future stolen in broad daylight. By the next morning, the mayor issued a statement condemning the violence. Local clergy held prayer circles. Parents held their children tighter. The name, China Forney, was on everyone's lips, but for all the wrong reasons. She had been poised to walk across the graduation stage in just a few weeks. Instead, her classmates would walk without her, some of them wearing ribbons in her honor, others silently carrying her memory in their hearts. Chyna wasn't the only person who lost something that day. Her mother lost a daughter. Her friends lost their joy. Albany lost a shining example of what its young people could become. And as investigators began piecing together the timeline and identifying the suspects, one thing was already clear to everyone in that neighborhood. May 3rd, 2021, would forever be remembered as the day everything changed. For weeks, the Forney family had struggled to make sense of the unthinkable, how their daughter could have been taken from them so suddenly. But what came next would only deepen the wound. The investigation into Chyna Forney's murder moved swiftly. Albany police, responding to community outrage and mounting pressure, launched an intense manhunt. Surveillance footage, witness statements, and ballistic evidence all pointed to two individuals, Alvin Foy III and Jammer Manning, both just 20 years old. But what stunned the community most wasn't just the speed of the arrests, it was who these young men were. Foy wasn't a total stranger. In fact, he was someone whose presence in the neighborhood had never raised red flags. A familiar face, a name that didn't immediately register fear. To Chyna's family, the realization that someone they had once seen in passing, maybe even exchanged a casual hello with, could have pulled the trigger. That was betrayal layered on tragedy. Even more disturbing was the revelation that both Foy and Manning were members of the 50 Gang, a local criminal group long associated with violent turf disputes, drug trafficking, and senseless gunplay in Albany's most vulnerable neighborhoods. The 50 Gang wasn't new to the police. They'd been linked to several shootings across the city, but authorities had struggled to dismantle the group's network. That failure now had a body count, and her name was Chyna. On May 3rd, 2021, the two gang members were engaged in a dispute with rivals in Albany's Essex Street neighborhood. In a reckless attempt to assert dominance, they opened fire. More than 31 shots were fired into a crowd in broad daylight. The bullets weren't aimed. They were sprayed. Indiscriminate. Wild. Deadly. Chyna, simply walking through her own neighborhood, became collateral damage in a war she had no part in. Foy and Manning showed no signs of hesitation that day. And tragically, they showed no signs of remorse in the days that followed either. Within hours of the shooting, investigators had gathered enough evidence to identify Foy as a suspect. He was arrested on charges of second-degree murder, reckless endangerment, and criminal possession of a weapon. Manning, his accomplice, was captured later. Both were eventually indicted for second-degree murder, but the legal process would only unveil more horrors. During the preliminary hearings, family members noticed something chilling. Foy appeared casual, even cocky. Courtroom sketches showed a man slouched in his seat, barely acknowledging the severity of what he'd done. But it was during the sentencing phase that the pain of the Forney family reached its most public, devastating peak. Chyna's sister took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement. Through tears, she painted a portrait of her younger sister's life, her dreams, her energy, her kindness, and the gaping hole her absence had created. She recalled late-night talks about college, dreams of nursing school, the way Chyna could turn even the darkest moment into something lighthearted with a well-timed joke or that signature goofy dance of hers. But as she spoke, heart cracking open for all to see, Albany Foy laughed. Yes, laughed. The courtroom fell silent. Gasps echoed across the gallery. Her words, meant to honor the dead and heal the living, were met with mockery. To Chyna's family, that moment felt like losing her all over again. For many in attendance, the trial stopped being about due process. It became a study in inhumanity. How could someone take a life, then laugh in the face of that loss? The judge paused the proceedings briefly to regain order, but the damage was already done. Even the prosecution noted Foy's disturbing behavior in their final statements. They urged the court to recognize the sheer lack of empathy, not only in the act itself, but in everything that followed. Manning, though less outwardly expressive, offered no apology. His plea deal came with no emotion, no acknowledgement of the pain left behind.
Excuse me a second. Let the record reflect that the defendant is laughing during the victim impact statement. Regardless of whether you admit to brutally murdering her, you wouldn't sit at sentencing and laugh about it.
I didn't do nothing.
That's, sir, your time to speak has ended. It's now the court's time to speak and act like this is a bus stop or a bodega or a park bench.
I was wrongfully convicted.
Take the defendant back into the courtroom. Or back into the holding cells.
I ain't worried about it.
Now, at that point, Judge McDonough gave Foy the maximum sentence on each of his charges, 25 years to life on second-degree murder. The defense is appealing, as Foy repeatedly said he was innocent throughout the proceedings. His attorney says his demeanor was a result of the victim's sister mouthing something to Foy as she prepared her remarks.
I believe that just kind of set him off, and his reaction was inappropriate during the circumstances, I agree, but I believe that kind of set him off.
Does he feel remorse?
Yes, that was like his sister. It was like his sister. She used to come to our house.
And for him to have absolutely no remorse or no regard, China Forney got caught in the middle of a situation that cost her life.
One of those close to Forney told the reporters he deserved it as they walked out of the courtroom.
In April of 2023, nearly 2 years after Chyna's death, the court delivered its sentence. Albany Foy was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Jamra Manning accepted a plea deal, receiving 20 years to life after pleading guilty to murder in October of that year. Justice, at least on paper, had been served. But for Chyna's loved ones, no number of years could erase the memory of that courtroom smirk or the sound of 31 bullets tearing through a peaceful afternoon. The broader community was left shaken. Parents in Albany, already worried about rising youth violence, now found themselves asking impossible questions. How can a young man so desensitized to death be walking the same streets as our children? Why does it take a tragedy this big for the system to respond? The tragedy exposed more than a broken gang-affiliated youth. It revealed a community fraying under the weight of its own grief. For every Chyna, there were others, unnamed, unfilmed, unsentenced. Her death was not an isolated case, but part of a pattern long in the making. In the aftermath, mural artist Jalon Taylor captured Chyna's essence in a vibrant tribute painted on the very block where her life was taken. Her track shoes, nose ring, and infectious smile became brushstrokes of memory, bringing warmth to the cold corner where she was gunned down. The mural stood not just as a memorial, but as a defiant cry for peace. And while the court sentences marked the end of a legal chapter, they were far from a conclusion for those left behind. The trauma of that trial, the laughter, the lack of remorse, the unshakable cruelty, stayed with the Forney family long after the cameras stopped rolling. So now we ask you, speaking head, do you believe gang-related gun violence can be stopped, or is it getting worse? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about real solutions. In the days that followed Chyna Forney's murder, Albany transformed from a city in shock to a community in mourning. Essex Street, once just another residential road, became sacred ground. Dozens gathered at the site where Chyna fell, not to protest, not to demand answers, but simply to grieve. What began with a few candles quickly grew into a sea of flickering lights, flowers, handwritten notes, and photos of a bright-eyed girl whose future had been cut brutally short. Friends from her school brought purple balloons, her favorite color, and laid down her track shoes beside a framed photo of her in uniform. One message read, "Fly high, China. You were the light in our halls." But it wasn't just classmates and teachers who showed up. Entire families, many who had never met China, came to pay their respects. Some brought their children to show them the cost of senseless violence. Others simply stood in silence, tears falling as they stared at the spot where her life had ended. Her dance team performed a tribute routine during one of the vigils, moving in synchronized steps that once included China. Only now, her absence was the loudest part of the performance. Each beat of the music seemed to echo the collective heartbreak of a city still trying to understand how such darkness could strike someone so full of life. Muralist Jalon Taylor later painted a striking tribute on a brick wall near the scene. The artwork captured China's wide smile, her nose ring, her energy, and made sure that even in death, she remained a presence in her community. People came from across the city just to see it, some leaving flowers, others simply placing a hand on the wall and whispering a prayer. Even Albany's faith leaders stepped up. Pastor Charlie Muller, a longtime advocate against gun violence, announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of those responsible. Though the suspects had already been captured, Muller's gesture was a call to action, an urgent plea to break the cycle before another family was destroyed. The city's heartbreak was raw, but in that pain there was unity. From every corner of Albany, people came forward not only to honor China, but to say enough is enough. Her loss became a rallying cry for peace, and her memory a reminder of what the community stands to lose if it stays silent. When we reflect on the life and loss of Chyna Forney, we uncover painful truths that reach far beyond a single tragedy. Her story is one of betrayal, fragility, and the urgent need for change. Perhaps the most unsettling element in Chyna's case is that the danger came from familiar faces. Alvin Foy III wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was someone known in the community. That reality strikes a deeper nerve. It forces us to ask how often violence hides behind familiar eyes and how difficult it can be to see danger when it wears a familiar face.
If you're not a graduate, we actually got to go that way.
Please, if you're not a graduate, can you please back up into the stand? If you're not a graduate,
Yes, baby. Excuse me, I'm right behind you. Okay.
Mike. Take it. Huh? Don't touch it.
Excuse us.
Are they gonna cover it? They get ready to cover it. They get ready to cover it.
Thank you.
Chyna's death reminds us that betrayal doesn't always come from the outside. It can come from within our circles, our streets, our own neighborhoods. It also highlights how fragile life truly is. One moment, Chyna was preparing for graduation, excited to pursue nursing, and change lives. The next, she was gone, her future stolen in seconds by a bullet meant for someone else. This wasn't a calculated act against her. It was senseless, random, and it's precisely that randomness that makes it so devastating. We're reminded that tomorrow is never guaranteed, and that violence doesn't just target one person. It shatters everyone connected to them. Her loss also ignites the call for stronger intervention for youth at risk. What could have changed if those involved had been reached earlier? What if someone had offered an alternative path, a way out of the gang culture that led them here? Chyna's story fuels the case for better prevention programs, earlier outreach, and more community-based strategies to keep young people from choosing violence as a way of life. Finally, her death has shown us the power of community healing. From murals to vigils to advocacy campaigns, Chyna's memory has inspired real conversations and real action. Honoring victims means more than remembrance. It means demanding better. It means refusing to let their lives end in silence. What do you think Chyna's story teaches us about trust and justice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe her memory can spark change, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with us here at Crime Scene Exposed, where we uncover the truth behind the crimes that haunt us and the stories that deserve to be told. Chyna Forney's story is one of light dimmed too soon, a life that radiated promise, joy, and ambition, only to be silenced by violence she had nothing to do with. She was on the verge of adulthood. A star student, a track champion, a friend who made others laugh when they felt low, and a daughter who brought pride to her family. Her dreams weren't out of reach. She was steps away from graduation, ready to begin a future built on healing others through nursing. Instead, her name joined a list of far too many, young lives taken not by illness or accident, but by bullets. Preventable, avoidable bullets. But Chyna's legacy doesn't end on Essex Street. It lives on in every step her dance team takes, in every candle lit at her vigil, in every conversation sparked by her story. It lives in the mural that watches over the community. And it lives in us, those who remember her, those who speak her name, and those who choose to fight for a world where kids like Chyna can grow up safe and free. May her story never be forgotten, and may her memory move us to demand more for every Chyna still with us.